let's jump into our first session. Super excited, but let me introduce to you our keynote speaker, our first speaker for you today, hailing from the Windy City. I call him Mr. Marquette. He is the CEO for Flexera Software, a huge Green Bay Packer fan, and one hell of a skier. If you don't know that, Mr. Jim Ryan. Jim, welcome to the virtual stage. Before we begin, I'm going to ask all the speakers, just tell me the 2 or 3 applications on your phone today that you really can't live without.
2 or 3 applications on my phone. First of all, thanks for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it. In no particular order, 1Password is vital on my phone and every other device that I own. 2 would be Control4. I'm a big home automation fan, and it's all controlled via my phone. And then mostly during the evenings and over the weekend, it would be Cellar Tracker, which is the app that I use to track all the wine in my cellar that I both buy and
Very good. I have Control4, but I absolutely hate it, and I want to throw it into the trash. So I don't have. I wouldn't rank that one up there. But kick it off, Jim. Take it away. It's all yours.
Thanks again, Kevin, and thanks everybody else for sitting in on this. For those of you that heard me last year, I was a little bit provocative and declared that Sam as we know it is dead. I still stand by that statement, by the way, in most instances. And what I'd like to do today is just talk to you about some of the unintended consequences that I'm seeing and we see at Flexera of companies transitioning to the cloud. And I think that that has implications for each and every one of you. We saw it on the poll as to, first of all, what you wanted to talk about and where your biggest areas are. For what it's worth, for those of you that selected governance as the #1 thing standing in your way, I would tend to agree. And what I'd like to do is just share with you some of my experiences in working at Flexera and running the company. So I spent 24 years at Flexera, and I've seen a lot of things. I've seen the industry evolve where things haven't necessarily been revolutionary. They've evolved over time. When I first started out doing this, our biggest concern was trying to track down Microsoft Word and Excel licenses or deal with Adobe. The introduction of virtual machines from VMware started to come onto the scene, as did VDI and other technologies, before Mark Benioff declared that software was dead as we knew it, and it was all SaaS all day long. Of late, over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, of course, cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud have come onto the scene, and of course, I don't get involved in at least a technical conversation nowadays without talking about Kubernetes and the containerization of everything. And while all the nomenclature and terminology is complex and interesting for all of us to talk to, right, it's really the P&L and the profit and loss and the budget and the money that ultimately causes C-levels, which trickles downhill to many of us on where their angst is and where they have to spend their time and efforts. Our situation is really straightforward. If you can go to the next slide here. I've been saying for years that the technology or the software supply chain is the single most dysfunctional supply chain in all of industry today. And I stand by that statement for sure. It's just crazy that companies or enterprises that are buying and procuring technology, whether it's software, SaaS, software as a service, or cloud services, they're just constantly on the back foot as it relates to trying to effectively buy and manage that overall estate. The deck is proverbially always stacked against you in any type of ELA negotiations. And the fact of the matter is, with the introduction of cloud, multi-cloud, and hybrid cloud, it's not getting any easier. This is the only industry where suppliers actually routinely audit their customers. We put out three distinct reports annually at Flexera. We have a state of ITAM, state of the cloud, and state of tech spend. Here we're sourcing it from the state of ITAM, and as you can see, 24% of the respondents have received 7-figure audit bills from their software suppliers. And I think we can all agree on one thing. that inflation is here to stay. It's not transitory, not in the United States, but globally. And right now, in the boardrooms and virtual conference rooms and every technology supplier around the globe, they're evaluating their pricing, their packaging, the way that they go to market with their enterprise license agreements, and they're absolutely positively talking about how they're going to reprice and package their bundles and their offerings for people that are going into the cloud and having to manage hybrid cloud. And in the 24 years of doing this, I think we can all agree that one thing is most probable the outcome is that the suppliers are not incented and will not be providing you and I with the technology to sift through consumption and usage and provide transparency in what is being used and how you and your organizations can effectively spend your dollars on the technology that you're using. So we feel that the winds that that are prevailing are complicated, and it's complicated because IT and procurement and the suppliers run this siloed game, and they're not optimized. So when I see that 35% or whatever the number was of you that wanted to talk to governance, and that governance was preventing you and your organization from doing a better job, I agree. Because this age-old trick of suppliers going to the business or going exclusively to IT, negotiating all-you-can-eat agreements or complex entitlements and everything, throwing it over the fence to procurement, who then negotiates what they think are great discounts and terms on something, only to never revisit usage until the next DLA is coming up. I would argue that many enterprises are making it too easy for the dysfunction to permeate in all aspects of what they're doing. And the result, again, is that enterprises, the companies that you work for, are constantly on their back heels. And whether it's data center software, the usual suspects, whether it's SaaS and SaaS applications, or now cloud and everything that to do with AWS, Azure, and Google, all of these suppliers are playing the game and using things against you. And I don't mean it to say that every one of your suppliers is a contentious relationship, because I see it all. I see wonderful relationships and I see really acrimonious relationships. But the companies that do this at scale the best are ones that try to break down and eliminate these silos and take a different view as to how they're going to do things. And the view is it starts with the CIO and the CFO. So whether you're a CIO on this call, or you're working for a CIO, or you're working for somebody that works for somebody who works for a CIO, the fact of the matter is that the area that we're responsible for and you're responsible for is growing. It's good times. 44% of all the companies are expecting to actually grow their IT spend. 54% of that budget increase is going to go to software, to SaaS, to infrastructure and platform, and to growth environment. So that's good news. But I think that the challenge and the focus area from the CFOs, chief procurement officers, and CIOs I routinely talk to is that they're trying to put more and more of that budget on growth. Right? So there's a little bit of a disconnect in the poll that I saw today, because only 2% of you want to talk about innovation. But we see that 36% of our C-level executives, and what companies want to do, what CEOs want to do, is chase growth and innovation. And that's where we're seeing some of the explosion on the cloud spend and everything, which does ultimately whipsaw and have a profound impact on those of you that are dealing in ITAM and some of the legacy data center things like that. So while you may not be chartered explicitly with managing growth and innovation, you have to be aware of what the organization is looking for and be able to respond to this. So that's the situation. The complication with cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud is that it's making our job and your job more complex as it relates to IT or software asset management. Now, cloud isn't new. For the last 6 years, according to our 22 State of the Cloud report, for the last 6 years, 6 long years, the number one issue, bar none, has been customers trying to optimize their use of cloud. They're trying to spend less, or they're trying to be smarter in the way that they spend their money in the area of cloud. And yet, for 6 years, this is a self-audited assessment. For 6 years, they've been trying to do that. It's been their number one priority, but either behind closed doors or even openly, they'll confide or state that a third of that spend is wasted. Now, I just spoke to a customer, I can't give you their name, but I spoke to a customer who spends $1 billion, $1 billion on cloud spend each and every year. You can do the math of what 32% translates into. It's real tangible money. And that tangible money results in inefficiencies and an opportunity for SAM practitioners, for ITAM professionals, for FinOps, and everybody a part of the supply chain to lean in and really understand what the problems are, because there's gold in those hills. There's opportunities for us to go in and optimize and do a better job in this area. But it is harder with cloud. It's not impossible. As we continue to evolve, not a revolution, it becomes more challenging. And one of the ways in which it becomes more challenging is that as you and the business consume more services from AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, we're seeing a SKU explosion. Just like we dealt with SKU explosions back in 2007 and 8 when we were first chasing after some of these software desktop applications, we're seeing an explosion of SKUs at the cloud level as well. So while we may talk about cloud differently, we talk about containerization, Kubernetes, tagging applications, we talk about things differently, the fact of the matter is the challenge remains the same. You've got to discover what's actually being out there, and you've got to deal with SKUs and actually find out, transcend SKUs and transcend invoices to figure out what's actually being run and consumed. Ingesting an invoice from AWS, everybody does that, right? That's not the magic of the magician here, right? Interrogating the general ledger so that you can allocate cost, important for sure, but that's not really the challenge. The challenge is to figure out what's actually being run, spun up and down, and do you really need it, so that you can change behavior, put governance and best practices in there to optimize your tech spend. And then lastly, what we're seeing with cloud is, in addition to the SKU explosion, everybody's opsing it. So let's call it the explosion or rise of XOps. And some of you are on here. I'm not criticizing the pursuit of being FinOps certified, but we see AI ops, DevOps, SecOps. Now we've got DevSecOps, Data Ops. And all of this fragmentation of ops is well-intended and good and necessary. But the fact of the matter is, it's also highly fragmented. So when a FinOps person goes in and is solely focused on ingesting an invoice from one of the major cloud providers, and then trying to allocate cost back out to the business, that's great. And that person is probably nimble. And for that particular slice of the overall pie, there may be efficient distribution or cost allocation of the bill. But that's not really addressing the 32% waste that people are seeing in their gargantuous cloud spend that's keep going up and up and up. So we actually think that this is a reality that's not going away. When you look at your org charts, it's not uncommon to see the SAM or the ITAM team being completely separate from the cloud team. In fact, I'll talk to many executives in an IT organization, and we're having a great conversation about data center and SaaS and optimizing the spend in that area. But then when I go and ask them about their strategy as it relates to cloud and hybrid cloud issues, I get a blank stare oftentimes. And it's not because they're disinterested, it's because the organization has decided to set themselves up in a bifurcated manner. And that bifurcation is a liability. That bifurcation is an opportunity for switched on professionals to try and do some process design and process re-engineering to pull that back together and address it holistically, because it's only by addressing it holistically that you're going to be able to ultimately address some of this challenge. So again, the implication of this cloud environment seeping in or running in, or a tsunami wave coming in your organization, puts the organization and oftentimes you in a position where you do need a holistic way to manage that. And when we go out and we talk to people about their organizational spend on public cloud, it's really an unsustainable situation. What this chart says is, over the next 12 months, they're expecting their cloud spend to go up by 29%. But when you ask them, how are you doing against your current budget? Most people are over by 13%. And I don't know the way your organization runs its business, but the way we run our operation at Flexera is, if you're over budget and we haven't increased your budget in one area, you better go and find 13% to carve it out in another area. And I think companies are running out of options. We've been, in many ways, fortunate with this pandemic. We've been able to scale back on square footage with all of our leaseholds. We've been able to dial down travel and expense. There's a variety of different levers that we've had at our disposal with this pandemic that are coming to an end. And some of this budget overrun isn't sustainable, we believe, and many of our customers tell us that it's just simply not sustainable as we continue to look out. So our position, and the position of many executives that I talk to, is that you can regain some semblance of control in this. It's all is not lost, even if your organization isn't necessarily set up to treat it holistically. And I think it's an opportunity for SAM practitioners, for ITAM professionals, even for FinOps, who may be part of the cloud narrative right now, but don't have visibility and or involvement in some of the SAM or ITAM practices and things going on within an organization. I think it's a great career opportunity, a great opportunity for all companies for them to take a step back and look at the way in which some of this technology is procured, brought into an organization, deployed, and used. Because it's only by doing that holistically that we're going to be able to go and solve some of these things. And I think the first step, regardless of what your role is in an organization, is to take a step back and understand that flux capacitors inside and all the techno-babble speak, this is no longer an IT problem. As IT financial management, you look at what Apptio's done in sucking data out of the general ledger and doing what they do on IT financial management, it's great. But now that we're allocating cost back to the business, this is very, very quickly becoming a business problem. It's no longer just dumping the cost into IT and treating them and IT as a cost center. We're starting to allocate things in mass back to the businesses so that they're now carrying the cloud cost. And sitting on top of any business, whether it's a division, a business unit, or a CEO, is somebody that's got a strong arm of a CFO that's looking at cost and looking at the P&L. And business leaders, look past some of the technology and take a step back and say, listen, this is crazy. You keep telling me that you can't control our cloud spend, right? You've demonstrated over the last 6 years, you've told me that you're going to get this under control, and you haven't. And now, once again, we find ourselves where you're 13% over budget. That's no longer sustainable. There's got to be a better way. So I think the good news is the lines of business and business people are taking a look at this, becoming more proficient as to what some of the cost drivers are in the P&L. And good news or bad, one of the biggest cost drivers by far for any business, Flexera included, is our spend in cloud, right? Everything we do now is run as a service. Everything we lead with is software as a service. And one of the fastest growing line items in my budget every year is what I spend with AWS. And that's something that we eat our own dog food, so to speak, and we're getting our arms around. And there's opportunity for any type of customer to go and do better by taking a look at it from a business perspective. Now, this is just a quote from one of our customers, but it sets up where we think the focus needs to be. And where we think the focus needs to be is exactly what I told each and every one of you last year when I said that data is the new oil. It is about the data. And this is from one of our large financial services customers. You can read it. The effective use of business technology, not just technology, but giving technology to lines of business so they can go and grow and compete. The biggest inhibitor is the depth, precision, and commonality of the data that describes it. Now, I would submit this is still a data problem. It's got a cloud or a hybrid cloud bent to it that has ripple effects into SAM and ITAM, but it's a data problem at the end of the day. And the mind shift or the mindset that I would encourage and implore all of you to get into is that you need to transition, and you need to transition from data and just talking about data and transition to, it's a cliche, but more business intelligence. Again, the spaghetti snarl that you saw on the preceding slide is what we step into and I step into all the time. And where we hang out is we spend most of our time at Flexera with enterprises, the biggest, the baddest, the most bureaucratic and political machines you've ever seen. And I say that affectionately. But what they have is a bunch of data, and they're getting just all sorts of data from all sorts of suppliers, and it's compelling. And all of this data is disseminated and being managed and reported on with all of these different technologies, with all of these different ops type people that we saw in a few slides earlier here. But the challenge is, can you transition from all of this spaghetti mess of data to get to a centralized data repository that brings it all together? And by bringing it all together, you not only bring asset management, traditional asset management, and SaaS and cloud and everything we're going to talk about over the next 2 days here with Software One, but we're also starting to see a massive convergence with security, because it goes to reason. I'm sure you've even heard of it. You can't secure what you can't manage, and you can't manage what you don't know exists. And I think that all of us as ITAM, SAM, FinOps type people have an unprecedented opportunity to try and take a step back and look at all of this data and turn it into business intelligence, and try to get to a holistic view of what is being used, what is being consumed, link that back to what you're entitled to actually use and consume. There's great financial outputs that you can go and grab by taking a look like that, but there's also other value-added things that you can do as it relates to a wide variety of different functional practices with any well-run IT operation. So that's the position that we have, is that at the end of the day, it still is a data problem. We acknowledge, and I acknowledge, that cloud is on everybody's brain, and it's on everybody's brain because that's where the exciting stuff is, but the exciting stuff is also resulting in an unsustainable budget step up. So from our perspective, what's necessary is you need to take action. You can put your head down, you can go and get your next certification of FinOps and continue to work on what perhaps your remit is. Save us money on our cloud spend. Make sure that our cloud spend is allocated back to the businesses in a satisfactory manner. If you're on the SAM or the ITAM side of the house, hey, continue to go and make sure that we're doing asset management. Make sure that we're discovering everything, that we're integrating with Tanium, SCCM, and make it a technology thing. Just get us audit ready, or keep Oracle off of our backs. Oh, and by the way, maybe you can tinker around with ServiceNow and Salesforce and all of our other top SaaS suppliers, right? That's traditional SAM, traditional asset management. But I would encourage each and every one of you to try and take a step back and at least start to get into a conversation on, is there an opportunity to pull it all under one organization? And if you're not, that may be politically impossible. It may not happen, but then is there a way that you can develop alliances and almost a consortium within that siloed or bifurcated organization to take a holistic view at this problem? Because it's only taking a holistic view that we're going to be able to solve that. And in order to do that, we believe that there are 4 proficiencies that really need to occur at the individual or organizational level. And again, it starts with data. You need to have a definitive technology resource data set for the organization to act on. And think back to the spaghetti chart that transforms into business intelligence. It's only by getting to this common data set and data store where you can see what the environment is, that you can start to right-size the environment, deal with obsolescence, and start to be part of the solution to migrate to the cloud. Resisting modernization and resisting cloud migration is a fool's errand. And we think that that's a very, very long tail, and it's not happening overnight. But the fact of the matter is, organizations are spending more money getting off of some of this legacy data center app technology, and they want to migrate to the cloud. As SAM and ITAM practitioners, we have an unprecedented opportunity to be part of the narrative and actually help that out. But it's not good enough or satisfactory to just have the best data. You need to have not only data on what is out there across your data center, your SaaS, and your cloud environments, but then you need to become proficient on what's actually being consumed. Because the dirty little secret in this business is that, yeah, we spent $100 million on the ELA with IBM, but truth be told, we can only find $80 million worth of usage here. So I think that the consumption intelligence is absolutely something that you and the organization have to become good at. And that consumption doesn't start and stop with your data center and your SaaS applications, right? We've got to look at consumption on the cloud. We do have to be container aware. We do need to know our way around Kubernetes, and we need to understand the implications of lifting and shifting a legacy data center and chucking it in the cloud, just as much as we need to understand what happens if we modernize that and go to cloud native services. Because if you've been doing this for a long time, I've been doing this a long time, we all know that what's out there and what we're paying for things to be out there isn't necessarily what's being consumed or needs to be consumed, and there's absolutely an opportunity to optimize that. So we need to be good with data and have a definitive technology resource data set. We need to be really good at consumption and interrogating the intelligence associated with that. And then again, I was pleased to see that 35% of you want more governance, because far too often we treat this as a one-time event. There's an audit, every action has a reaction. You get an audit letter, you scramble, you save the day and save some money on this particular audit. But when you've got hundreds or thousands of suppliers, you need to use automation and AI to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that's why, we're very excited about AI and machine learning. We're using machine learning in our business to do a better job on helping deliver curated and enriched content. And we just announced a significant partnership with IBM with their AI ops capability in the Turbonomic offering, right? Because as people retire and leave the workforce, there's less people to do this manually. We've got to use automation and technology to make sure that we're putting governance in there. And then last but not least, it's got to be done in a hybrid environment. No longer, I believe, is it satisfactory to just have a data center conversation with one group and then talk to the cloud group, right? You're only going to negotiate one contract with Microsoft. And I know that almost every one of you uses Microsoft. Almost every one of you will have Microsoft in your data center with SQL. You'll probably be using Microsoft O365. And if you're not on Azure, you're probably consuming some Microsoft licenses in an AWS or Google or Alibaba environment. So you've got to become proficient, if not fluent, in hybrid issues as well, because they're all intermingled together. And at the end of the day, when you start to get up to the chief procurement officer or the CFO level, it all comes out of the same P&L. So data, consumption, governance, and hybrid are the four key proficiencies that we believe are necessary in order to take action. And the benefits of doing this are compelling and they're real. It all comes down to dollars and cents here. When done well, especially when done well at scale, there is literally millions, tens of millions, and in some of the edge conditions we deal with, hundreds of millions of dollars at stake here that can be optimized. And whether you optimize those and throw them to the P&L and the bottom line, or you redeploy them to go chase innovation or growth, is really dependent on the particular company's circumstances. But there's absolutely a benefit, and there's absolutely unquestionably an opportunity to go and negotiate from a position of strength when this is done well at scale. So we think if you do that and acquire the four capabilities that we just described, everybody wins. So IT and security, again, we're seeing convergence with IT professionals and security use cases. IT and security, if they're doing this properly, illuminates the entire technology estate. No longer does it take a mad rush and a total scramble to try and answer the question, well, what do we have and where? That's still an issue that I deal with on a day in, day out basis when talking to some of our largest customers. So if you can do this, IT and security wins. The cloud team, whether they're part of the same organization or sitting somewhere else within the organization, they also win, because they're now starting to apply some of the tips and techniques and best practices that we've been using for nearly over 2 decades. For those of you that have been doing it that long, we've been doing this for over 2 decades, and the same techniques and best practices absolutely can apply on the cloud side of the house.
It's just right now, nobody wants to argue against, slowing some modernization or some data center consolidation projects down. What I see is a lot of people within the organization, they're fearful. They don't want to say, hey, wait a second, why are we doing that? Shouldn't we take a pause and actually look at whether or not we need all that capacity? More often than not, internally, people are saying, stand out of the way. This is an innovation modernization effort that's coming right from the CEO. It's full steam ahead here. And we're just going to go and ink that deal with filling the cloud provider's name and number there. But I think by deploying some of the techniques and technologies and processes and people at this problem, I think the cloud people win as well. And then lastly, I think for those of you that work for organizations that actually treat procurement or sourcing strategically, we see it both, but more and more enterprises treat procurement as a strategic entity and a strategic partner. By arming them with the cloud and IT information that we have in this hybrid world, they're able to negotiate better contracts. And the opportunity goes up exponentially. So in a few years' time, what we believe happens is we see IT and security transitioning from just getting the data and the insight and illuminating that technology landscape. We see it actually transitioning into real-time consumption monitoring. The conversations that we're now having with Turbonomic, IBM, and other technology providers around using machine learning and artificial intelligence, we've already got things in our R&D lab to try and take some of the manual effort out of this and really help get a real-time view into what you're consuming, because it's only by getting a real-time view that you can then dynamically make trade-offs that will hopefully help you save and optimize your environment. And really the cloud people win as well. It's by marrying up the cloud teams and the traditional ITAM teams that we see and that we've been dealing with, where you can layer in that automation and truly go and grab some of the governance that some of you think are standing in your way from doing a better job with your ITAM practices. And I think that for those procurement teams that view themselves as a strategic partner, not just a commodity that's there to try and squeeze their suppliers at the very last entity, for those that have invested in Coupa or Ariba, or who are leveraging PuraCloud from Software One, right? As we all know, it's the procurement part of this supply chain that all too often doesn't get enough discussion and notice in this business here. So we envision a day where not only we're doing real-time consumption monitoring, linking very closely with artificial intelligence and AIOps technology, but it's really a much tighter coupling and relationship in with the procurement systems and with the chief procurement officer. I tell my team all the time, if I can only talk to one person nowadays, I want to talk to the chief procurement officer, because it's really that individual. If they're empowered and if they're strategic, that person will care about having a hybrid discussion. The chief procurement officer will understand that a siloed, fragmented, bifurcated organizational structure instead of buying habits is just going to result in waste and efficiency. And it's the chief procurement officer's single remit to eliminate as much waste and inefficiency as humanly possible within their own supply chain. So we think it can be done, and we think that the playing field, so to speak, can be leveled in your next negotiation with all of the logos here, plus the hundreds of other logos that are out there. We think it's a target-rich environment, and we think that by doing this and taking this approach and trying to bring cloud and ITAM together, there's great opportunities for you to really redefine your career or make a major impact on your particular organization. This is one of our largest SaaS customers. So we've got this customer. They have approximately, I think it's like 500,000 devices that we're managing. On software alone, they're spending $750 million each and every year with their software suppliers. Plus, they spend more on their hardware and more on their cloud. And you can see some of the results that they're able to generate by taking this approach. They're leveraging data. It all starts with the data to help discover everything that's out there, both what's being out there, what's being consumed, but then also marrying that up with the procurement and the entitlements that are on the contracts that they've signed over the years. and they are saving millions and millions and millions of dollars. They've done a really nice job quantifying the reduction in productivity or the increase in productivity. They've done a great job calculating ROI, and when done properly and when done well, you can get a payback on this thing in less than 12 months. Just like we were doing 20 years ago on the desktop and transitioned into other apps like SaaS and such. It's possible, but it's only possible if we take a different approach, and it's only impossible if we engage with other aspects and people within the organization to take a look at some of these habits. So I'll leave you with this. I would argue that sometimes ITAM and SAM people, we're our own worst enemy. You're your own worst enemy here. And you can sit back and you can wait until the cloud people come and continue to peck at your application set and modernize that and take budget away from you. And you can feel like a victim, or you can feel like you're no longer as strategic as you once were. Or if we're going to get to where we are, where Kevin describes, I think ITAM is really something strategic now, you can have a mind shift. And, quote Da Vinci, people of accomplishment rarely sat back and let things happen to them. They went out and they happened to things. For those of you that have been doing this for years like I have, you know what the problem is. You know that it's drunken disorderly on the cloud side of the house. You know how to do discovery and set up technology resources. You know the importance of what you do can be applied to the cloud practices. The challenge now is, what are you going to do about it? So I don't know what you're going to do about it, but I'll offer my expertise, my organization's expertise. If there's anything that we can do, or just think it's wonderful that Software One runs these type of these events. There's plenty of help there out on the landscape to help you think through it, to talk to your executives, because sometimes executives need to be told how their worldview is wrong and poked in the eye figuratively on taking a different view. But I think we can all always be a little bit more provocative and reach outside of our cubicles and our own silos to help go and make our impact felt and go on and do great things. So with that, I thank each and every one of you once again for listening to me and taking time out. Kevin, back over to you and the team.
Fantastic, Jim. Thank you very much, as always. Always good to hear from you. Some of my takeaways is, I didn't hear a single word about entitlements or, traditional compliance. So it tells me that we're starting to have more and more of a business conversation here, which is really interesting. I like your comment, drunken disorderly. I might have to use that in the future. But I do have a question for you. But I'm going to encourage, first of all, the audience, if you have questions for Jim, we do have about 10 minutes. So please put your questions in the console. But Jim, you talked about a definitive data set as kind of step one in this process. So help me understand the role that, let's say, the ITAM solution plays there versus what maybe some of the people on the call might be also looking at, CMDB and other types of systems. What do you think in terms of defining that definitive data set? Is it a single source system? Is it multiple source systems? And perhaps where would a company like Flexera play in there?
Yeah, the answer is it depends. I don't think there's a one size fits all. I mean, a lot of times it starts with your discovery capabilities. And while I deal with a lot of customers that are trying to get to a homogeneous discovery solution like ITAM or something like that, the fact of the matter is very few companies have that luxury. So I think step one is, what's the best way to cast the net and illuminate your IT estate? You've got to be able to integrate and consolidate, bring everything together, SCCM, Tanium, BigFix, what's going on in your cloud environment, and the dozens of others that I didn't mention. You've got to be able to bring them all back. You have to be able to normalize that, curate it, enrich it, and constantly, go and clean and enrich it. We've got a content team and we've got machine learning, and I think we're up to every day we're making 5,000 additions to our definitive technology data set. So it's not a one and done. And I think step one is, what are you doing from discovery? What's the strategy? Who owns the discovery? What's the role of security? Who's always got a say in discovery? And you come up with that. Whether or not that data then resides in something from Flexera, or you take something from Flexera and pump it into a CMDB, that we've seen a lot of different things. I think the landscape is littered with a lot of failed CMDB projects, but we're starting to see more emphasis on that. So I think it's less about where is the container housed or who owns it, but it's, are you getting everything that's being used out there into a system that's normalized, so that you can then just serve it up to all of these different functions and stakeholders.
Okay, perfect. Heather, I think you've got a couple questions.
Yeah, we've had a couple questions come in. The first one starts off with a comment. I couldn't agree more. ITAM, when integrated with IT security, FinOps, finance, achieves more than it ever thought. However, I have yet to come across many ITAM organizations that have a seat at the table in the Cloud Competency Center, being FinOps and IT security. We all talk and agree that ITAM needs a seat at the table, but truth be told, many of my peers are yet to secure that seat. Therefore, what would you suggest is the best approach for ITAM to secure a seat at the table? Great question.
I couldn't agree more, and in no particular order, a couple things. First of all, there's a saying in at least the sales business that you get delegated down to the people you sound like, and you want a seat at the table. We're not talking about technology. So first things first, I think you've got to become really good and proficient at trying to stay away from, I always call it the flux capacitor, bits and bytes, feeds and speeds, and everything. Most executives don't know what Kubernetes is or discovery and all of that. So I think you've got to be able to talk the language of business. Hint, the language of business is follow the P&L. It's all about dollars and cents here. Number one. Number two, I do think that that sometimes ITAM professionals are their own worst enemies. So they don't have a seat at the table. They complain that they don't have a seat at the table, but they're not really trying to get that seat. I think it's you do have to look out into the organization, find out who shares your opinions. I don't want to sound like a politician, like say everything's political, but you've got to find alliances and people that have a common worldview. So are there people in the cloud environment that you can have a meeting with, a virtual cup of coffee, and see if they share your position and that you can team up? What we believe is that the procurement entity sometimes is the most sympathetic to having that conversation. So again, in sales, you typically avoid talking to procurement people until the very end. But there's a whole team of people that get up every day in their working life at your company, and their sole focus is to try and drive out waste and efficiency. So if your cloud brethren and sisters aren't really open and sympathetic and don't want to talk to you, I do think finance and procurement are really great examples of entities and potential executive sponsors that would at least hear you out and have that. And then lastly, I think there's just there's a plethora of different, whether they're ebooks written by Kevin Hooten or whoever they are, or seminars and things like that. I think now there are enough articles or presentations that are available that maybe you pass along to some execs. Whether it's the CIO, CFO, CPO, or all of them. Just trying to get them interested and give them another view. I'm doing as best I can to try and go out and evangelize on the way we think it should be viewed, and I think we're making some progress. But one of my great frustrations, I think we share this, that it's just not happening enough. Right? It's ludicrous that we all don't have a seat at the table.
Thanks, Jim. A comment on your comments. So ITAM needs to be collaborative and work through the adversity with their stakeholders. It is all about alignment of the goal and the objectives with those you serve. So definitely on point there. We have another question that's come in. Flexera does a great job in discovering IT landscape. Are there any solutions that are working to automate the removal of any unused software?
There's a lot, probably far too many for me to get into. So again, we do some of that, as do many others. I think, our position over the last 2 decades has been to remain agnostic on discovery and, integration in your ITSM or your ticketing solution. I know that when we, our recent announcement with IBM is all about, when Turbonomic and IBM uses AI Ops to spin up more capacity, that's a licensable event. And we're making sure that we're pushing the licenses around so that we're not creating a licensable opportunity. This is an area that I think you should watch very closely, because I think it's not just decommissioning software. And especially as we talk with cloud, one of the biggest liabilities of going to that hybrid cloud environment, it's the number of cores and this virtualized hardware that you're now throwing at the problem. We're dealing with a situation with a large CAD provider that this customer moved a bunch of CAD software into a cloud environment, and in doing so broke the licensing rules because they maxed out on cores. So we're trying to balance hardware and software. So the answer is there's a lot of different ways to do that. It really depends on the taxonomy and what you've got going on. But I do think that's where your the ticketing system, the CMDB, the workflow, and everything else, along with AI Ops, can all be leveraged to perhaps pull all of that off. I think that trying to find any one provider that does that, they may disagree. We don't see one doing it all without some market trade-offs.
Thank you so much.
There's a detailed question that one of my team can answer, but please go offline to somebody at Software One, and we can certainly help you out in that.
Awesome.
Yeah, fantastic stuff, Jim. Go ahead, Heather. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to ask one last question in our last moments here. Do you see a shift in the role of ITAM in IT operations and service?
I do. I think the shift is that it's got to be more integrated. It's not a standalone function, and I think that the good news is I'm biased, running a company like Flexera, but if you subscribe to the fact that one of the great things that you got to do or become great at is standing up this technology resource entity and data set, I really think you're the custodians of it. And I think if you're the custodians of that data, you're really in a great position to work with ops and service and security and FinOps and the cloud folks as well, because somebody needs to manage that data. Somebody needs to make sure that it's constantly being updated, enriched to account for just the dynamic world that we live in here. So I think that you and people like you become more integral and essential if you lean in and become integral and essential. I think if you stand back and treat it as a standalone entity, or let your organization treat it like that, again, I think you get delegated down to the person that you sound like that. You allow yourself to do it.
Fantastic, Jim. Once again, I want to thank you so much for being our keynote once again. I thought it was great content. Yeah, I think this seat at the table piece is really interesting. Just to add a little bit to it from my perspective is, I think 2 things that we could do to obtain that seat at the table is, number one, we need to get out of this conversation about strictly compliance and bean counting, and we need to move ourselves into a role of where we're having this business conversation, right? Where we can tie in security, where we can tie in, the integrated supply chain. And then the other piece of it, I think, is we have to make the business case, right? And, as you alluded to, right, when you have 30% wasted spend, wherever you want to call it, on-prem, in the cloud, SaaS, those beans add up, right? So you got to make the business case. So all of that's to say, once again, thank you, Jim. Great content as always, and we appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and have a great session, everybody. Bye-bye.